What's up, everybody? Ryan Thomas live on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. It is Tuesday, September 10th. Another great day for yours truly. I went golfing this morning with a buddy of mine. Shout out to him, Mike Costello. And Mike's trying to teach me just anything he knows about the game. He's been golfing a lot longer than me, and he's been trying like hell to get me better, teach me little tricks of the trade, teach me anything that could make me better. And my golf game is getting there. We'll just leave it at that. It's getting there. I don't even want to say the number that I shot today on 9 holes. It was not great, not a great day. Getting better, driving the ball is not my problem. Hitting the ball with my 3-4 hybrid is not the problem. Chipping and putting is the problem. I need to do some considerable work on chipping and putting and getting that facet of my golf game better in order to really minimize some of the strokes that I had today. And, you know, we got a little bit left of golf season, a little bit left. Trying to milk it for all it's worth, trying to get as many rounds in as I possibly can, and almost played 18 today. I thought about it, but had a lot of stuff going on today, including this episode of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. So I really am excited to dive into this topic of discussion. Tomorrow night, probably around 7:30, probably around 8 o'clock, I'll be joined by Ty B of Trainwreck Sports, a colleague of mine through Trainwreck Sports, where we are going to really dive into some MMA topics. This will be one of them, but I wanted to put this one out just to let the MMA viewers and listeners know my opinion of the single biggest free agent in MMA, arguably in MMA history. If you look at everything that Cris Cyborg has accomplished throughout her career, this was a massive free agent that was available to the other MMA organizations out there. Now, her career ended with the Ultimate Fighting Championship with the UFC. A little bit oddly, shall we say. A lot of back and forth between Cris Cyborg and Dana White. A back and forth indeed that really played itself out over the period of, a couple weeks, where her management team released a video featuring Dana White, and then Dana White clapped back at her and said things, and it got ugly. So as far as Cris Cyborg in the UFC, you knew as a free agent she wasn't going there because the UFC technically let her go from her contract, and Dana said the main reason why he let her go was due to the fact that she was just tough to work with, and she did not want to fight Amanda Nunes again. Who knows what's true? We'll never know what's true. We'll never know what's reality. Oftentimes, with Dana White and fighter A, B, C, or D, you are really forced to take his word for it. His platform is just as big, if not bigger, than that of any fighter outside of Conor McGregor. So when Dana White gives these one-on-one interviews and dives into a scenario, a situation with one of his fighters, now former fighters in the case of Cris Cyborg, you're really left scratching your head wondering, what is true, what is false, and we'll never know. We'll never know. But I hold out the belief that sometimes, just like in any relationship, just like in any friendship, sometimes you just have to come to the conclusion that it's just not a good fit. It's not a good fit for either side. It's better to just part ways, go your separate ways, and move on, move forward. We've been there. I've been there. Relationships, whatever you want to call it. You have to tell yourself that, hey, I'm going to do what's best for me, and what's best for me is not this situation, obviously. What's best for me is to move forward and to start a new lease on life. And as hard as that is, because you invest so much into that said relationship, or in this situation, Cris Cyborg with the UFC, she had always wanted to fight in the UFC. And it finally happened for her. And with a lot of back and forth between Dana White and Cris Cyborg prior to Cris Cyborg even joining the UFC, it was always a little bit of a awkward situation with both Dana White and Cris Cyborg due to the fact that they had a past of somewhat talking smack about one another. So about 4 years ago, when Cris Cyborg did sign with the UFC, I thought to myself, well, we'll see how long this lasts. We'll see how long this will, not so much as even last, but how long before this situation gets ugly. And it took a couple years, but it finally happened. The situation, quote unquote, reared its head, and now Cris Cyborg is with Bellator MMA. And I think sometimes these things happen for the better. Situations like this, with Cris Cyborg signing with Bellator MMA, leaving the UFC, this situation, in my personal humble opinion, will be for the better. Will be a situation that we'll look back on and say to ourselves, okay, that made sense for her at that current juncture, at that time. It made sense for Cyborg to fight in the UFC. Now it makes even more sense for Cyborg to fight in Bellator, knowing what we know about how murky her relationship is, was, and always will be with the UFC. There's some things that no matter how successful you are within that relationship, you just can't get it right, and it's just time to move forward. That's where we're at with Cris Cyborg, and understandably so, that is where we are at. And that's okay. Those things happen. Those things happen to the best of us. But now I believe that Cris Cyborg is a better fit in Bellator MMA. I've talked about Bellator MMA quite a lot, as you guys know, being that this is a sports podcast where I really concentrate on MMA quite a bit. And in order to really understand MMA and to help and educate listeners and viewers as far as the wide spectrum of MMA, of mixed martial arts, I need to let them know about Bellator MMA. That's the best way to do it. That's the best way to really let the viewers and listeners know that, hey, there is more than just the UFC out there. That's what makes MMA special in its own right. Among the many reasons that make MMA special is that there are different, quote-unquote, flavors of the sport. You can't say that about the National Football League outside of college. There's no NFL 2 until, the XFL comes back in January, February of 2020. And we'll see how long that lasts. We saw how long the Alliance lasted, and we'll see how long the XFL 2.0 lasts. But there's no second major leagues. There's no second NHL. But really, in MMA, there's two organizations that have really built themselves up these last few years. Obviously, the UFC is the linchpin of the sport, the best of the best fight in the UFC, but Bellator MMA is definitely getting there. They have definitely added quite a lot of talent to their roster. Some of it is talent that they've discovered, and some of it is talent that they've plucked away from the UFC. Obviously, they're double champ, the light heavyweight champ, Ryan Bader, guys like Phil Davis, guys like Rory McDonald, they're welterweight champ, Gegard Mousasi, the now former Bellator middleweight champion, as he was upset by Rafael Carvalho. Or actually, no, that wasn't Carvalho. That was... Who was that beat Mousasi? I'll get to that later. But you have a wealth of fighters that are helping Bellator MMA get better as far as worldwide recognition. And, Rampage Jackson is over there. Czech Congo, who just fought for the heavyweight title. And then as far as some of the younger guys, Adam Archuleta is a true stud in Bellator MMA. James Gallagher is a true stud in Bellator MMA. Patricio Pitbull, the Pitbull brothers, those guys are solid. Benson Henderson, former UFC champ. Miles Jury, a new signing for the organization. So they got some names. They got some names out there. They got some guys and females. Rafael Lovato Jr., as far as the Bellator middleweight champ that defeated Giga Mousasi. And the women's featherweight champ, Julia Budd. The Canadian Julia Budd, she has had a hell of a run. Her last few fights, she's won like 8 straight fights. Her last loss was actually to Ronda Rousey, dating back to 2011. She was armbarred. Her loss before that, oddly enough, was to Amanda Nunes in 2011. So her 2 losses to Rousey and Nunes, and that's the fight that I would assume is lined up for Cris Cyborg. Actually, that's the fight that was confirmed by Bellator President Scott Coker as the next fight, the first fight for Cris Cyborg. She deserves the title shot. She's one of the greatest, if not the greatest, women's mixed martial artist of all time. And the only reason that we would have to even slightly debate that is due to the fact that Cris Cyborg did lose to Amanda Nunes. She was finished by Amanda Nunes. But I think that this is a perfect fit for her. Scott Coker and Cris Cyborg were spaghetti and meatballs in the Strikeforce days. I think that this relationship between Scott Coker and Cris Cyborg is one that features something that it never featured between Cyborg and Dana White. That was never featured, I should say, between Dana White and Cris Cyborg, and that was just respect. Simple respect. Dana White seemed to never have respect for Cris Cyborg, and she did go down a journey of not being civil with her company. But we'll see how it works out in Bellator. We'll find out.